So I trained for 12 weeks working towards a sub 3-hour marathon, and I gave it everything. And in this final episode, I'm gonna review the race, I'm gonna review the process, and I'm gonna give you the one key thing that I would have done differently. So if you're training for a marathon or even thinking about trying to complete one, then this video is your shortcut. I've boiled down months of training and looking at all of the applied nutrition. I'm going to be summarizing some of the things that worked and those that didn't, so you can take home the key facts and really speed your progression as you move towards your faster or first marathon. Righto, so across this whole series, I have really tried to give an honest account of the whole process, right through from the start, where I was struggling with calf injuries and I couldn't actually get out and do my long runs, and I was trying to mimic the run stimulus on the watt bike, which was pretty gruesome, but then learning from that and still using sport nutrition fueling and refueling strategies to amplify that training as much as I can. We then looked at how to fuel, so how to train my gut to be able to tolerate an increasing amount of carbohydrate, and putting a bit of a strategy and a process in place so that you can do the same thing, so that you can hold as high an intensity as you physically are able to for as long as you can. We then looked at different types of gels to be able to build a race plan that you are comfortable with and that you can hold down and metabolize efficiently. We then looked at building a carb load and actually having a plan that not only makes you hit the numbers, but is one that you're excited to eat and know is going to give you the confidence that you're going to run well on. I then looked at hydration, so making sure that I was going to be drinking enough according to my personal sweat rate, and I explained how you can go about calculating and estimating the amount of fluid that you need dependent on the amount that you sweat and whether or not you need electrolytes. We then looked at a caffeine strategy and I tested a few different ones, and this is something that I would highly recommend that you do along the way as well. So if you have just tuned into this video and any of that sounds interesting, then I recommend heading back through, because there's quite a lot of real practical sport nutrition tips in there. Okay, so the goal was to run sub 3. And I was really hoping for anything 2:55 to 3 was my sort of exciting goal. And I'm very torn because I ran it in 3 hours and 41 seconds. So I have quite mixed emotions about this, because on one side, my previous marathon PB was 3 hours 21. So I've hit an almost 21 minute or 20 minute personal best. So that should make me feel absolutely ecstatic and like I've made huge amounts of progress. Maybe because of the documentation and the sub 3 hour goal nature of this video series, I do feel a little bit upset and a little bit sad that I wasn't quite able to hold that. But then at the same time, the other element is I do feel like I did everything in my power to actually try and achieve that. And I know that nutritionally, I couldn't have done anything different. So the one different thing is gonna be, well, I'll detail that at the end if you're able to stay with me. Okay, so let's review how Edinburgh went from a nutritional standpoint. So let's start with the carb load. So on the Saturday before the race, I woke up and I immediately went to the bakery, and this got me excited about the carb load, because in the past I've done carb loads where it's mainly been rice and liquid carbohydrate. But in my latest practice one, so if you watch back on episode 6 in this series, you'll see how I went about achieving 640 grams of carbohydrate, and white bread was one of the key things there. And going to a bakery actually made it a bit more fun. It made it tasty. So I found a bakery in Edinburgh on that Saturday and then set about getting a lot of that white bread in. So I had some in the form of dippy eggs in the morning, and then had just lots of slices of toast with a bit of really tasty honey as well. Now, refined carbohydrate and something that I really enjoy, it was just easy to get lots of carbs in without actually making me feel, oh my God, I feel so bloated and full. Now for you, if you're someone who doesn't tolerate gluten all that well, bread might not be the option for you there, but it might be applying it in a different way. So it might be looking at lots of white rice, for example, to be able to get huge amounts of carbohydrate in without that much fiber. I do feel like I hit my numbers, I definitely know that, but then also I wasn't overly full in the evening. So I had my white rice tuna dish, which is my go-to pre-race dinner. I had that, I'd planned that, I'd taken that food up with me to Edinburgh, and I didn't have to force that down, went down easily. It's a relatively small evening meal, and then I didn't have to force anything extra down in that evening meal, which was great because it meant I woke up a little bit hungry, was able to have my normal oats on race day morning, felt pretty light on my feet and confident that I was completely full with my petrol tank. I know that this strategy worked because energy was not an issue for me during the run. The reason that I struggled to hold the intensity was simply that I couldn't tolerate that level of lactate acid production. So the final 5K were pretty miserable, to be honest. I really struggled with that, but mentally I knew, I was like, I've got the energy to do this, I just physically can't hold it. Now, the fueling plan. So I had a gel every 20 minutes. I had a gel, which was a 40-gram gel before I started, just 5 minutes before. Then had those 24 grams of carbohydrate gels, one every 20 minutes. And I had 30 grams of carbohydrate from fluids. That was absolutely spot on. I hit my numbers, 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour for 3 hours, and I didn't have any tummy trouble. And one of the reasons I know that this helped me from an energy perspective was that I was very mentally clear. So in the last hour, where sometimes if you've underfueled, you feel a bit, your mood, the desire to want to hold that sort of intensity drops, and actually you're not really quite as present in your head. So even though I was really struggling in those last 5-10K, the actual part of my brain was like, I was able to do the self-talk, I was able to do the mental strategies to try and keep me going. And I think that was the reason I didn't fall off my pace further. And after the race, I actually had a huge amount of energy, which is really bizarre. And you'd think after a marathon PB, you'd be absolutely floored. My sister, who was up there supporting, she was going to miss her flight going back to Edinburgh, and the transport situation from where the race finished in Musselburgh wasn't great going back to Edinburgh. So we actually ended up running from Musselburgh back to Edinburgh. And you'd think, why on earth would you want to run 5-10K after a marathon? But I had the energy to do that. So I think being able to fuel as aggressively as that 90 grams of carbohydrate per hour, it just meant I had a huge amount of energy for the rest of the day, which was quite nice. Hydration. So I had done a video on hydration and estimated my sweat rate. So I had planned to have at least 2 liters over the whole race. Now this is quite a lot. So I had planned to have those 2 500s, and I was making sure that I drunk that over the first hour and a half. And I'd got to that first hour and a half and they were both pretty much gone. So I knew I was on track with that. The sun was shining, so my sweat rate was quite high. After that though, I was a little bit reactive. So there were lots of water stations. So instead of just taking those, where you're then running with a small bottle with an open lid and you end up taking a few sips and you don't really want to run with that because it's sloshing everywhere. So actually what I did was I undid one of the caps in my running bottles and poured the water in while I was running and holding that 4:16 pace. Screwed the lid back on, and that worked perfectly because I wasn't carrying extra weight for the back half of the run and I could sip to thirst. So with fluid, you want to have it small and often. It's going to be much better for hydration. And I felt like I did really well there because I was probably pretty much on my 2 liters, but I wasn't carrying 2 liters from the off. Although I had this hydration plan, what I always say to clients is to be able to drink to thirst. And I was being able to drink to thirst. I had enough fluid on me with that strategy to be able to listen to my thirst signals. You don't want to drop past 2% body weight drop, and having that sort of fluid strategy allowed me to do that. Finally, reviewing caffeine strategy. So I'd had my double espresso with breakfast. This put me in a good place. I was really excited in the lead up to it, sort of videoing my kit and bouncing around, trying not to expend too much energy, but at the same time, just really embracing that pre-race feel. Then I had 2 caffeine gums, and I had one just before halfway and then one maybe 15 minutes after that. So I'd had about 200 milligrams of caffeine coming in that hit pretty quickly. Caffeinated gum hits within sort of 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes. So that was then lifting me up for the back half. And I do feel like, even though again, I was struggling to tolerate the lactate, mentally, I was able to push as hard as I physically could, which was a nice place. And it's one of the reasons that although I didn't achieve the sub 3 hour goal, I felt like I'd done everything in my power to give it my best shot. Okay, so what would I have done differently? Well, as you probably just learned, I felt nutritionally, I'd done pretty much everything very well. And if you have gone back through this series and listened to some of the principles that I've been talking about, and you can apply them in the same way, I feel like it's going to tee you up for a very successful race too. So the thing that I would have done differently is the training plan. I would have adapted. And this is really coming at it from a hindsight perspective, because beforehand, I didn't know that I was going to really struggle to hold that intensity in that final hour, because the training program doesn't really have you running race pace for up to about 2 hours. And in the final few runs runs where you're doing that right at the sort of spicy end of the training program, I was starting to suffer in that sort of last 15 minutes of that intensity. And that maybe put in my head a little bit of the, ooh, am I going to be able to do this? So what that tells me is that I kind of had the endurance base, and that's probably because of my background in ultra running. However, what I didn't have was a ability to tolerate that sort of intensity for that duration of time. So my training program maybe wasn't specific enough to train me to be able to run that 3-hour goal. What's the solution to that? Well, because I didn't have that piece of information, I didn't know that, I didn't know it at the time. So actually now, having been through this process, it's a real learning experience. And I think if I were to do it again, I'd want to work with a coach. And I'd actually want to work with someone who's able to program training sessions that are more specific to my needs. So that's where the benefit of working with a coach would come in really handy. Okay, let's summarize. So if you are training for your first marathon, or if you're looking to run your first fast marathon, or really try and nail down that PB or go sub-3 yourself, these are the key things that I want you to take home. Number 1, prioritize practicing your race nutrition early. So at least once every other week, but really use your long run as an opportunity to test your race nutrition. So practice high carb, even if the run is 60 to 90 minutes and you don't necessarily need that quantity of carbohydrate, use it as an opportunity to get your gut used to training with high levels of carbohydrate. This will also give you a lot of confidence on race day that you've practiced with that type of sport product and at the timings, and you feel good running, opening the gel at that sort of pace too. The second thing I want you to work on is practicing your carb load. So I would recommend minimum of once, but ideally twice, having practiced a full carb load, a full day of eating 8 grams per kilogram of body weight before your long run, so that you know on race day, I feel good and I can run well on this and I'm going to have no tummy issues. And the final thing I want you to take home is trust. I want you to trust the process. So if you're following some sort of training program, although it might not be exactly specific to yourself, there is going to be structured overload in it. And to be able to get the maximum amount of adaptation from that as physically possible, we're going to harness the power of food. So I want you to think about how food can enable you to adapt to all those training sessions. So that's making sure you're fueling during those sessions so that you can really push your levels, push your boundaries, especially during the intense ones. Think about what you're having before so that you're starting with your petrol tank in a good place, so that again, you can get the desired stimulus from that session. And then in the hour after, how you're going to utilize that window to recover. Are you having ample carbohydrates and a big hit of protein in that hour after to really just give your body what it needs to say, okay, that was a good session, but now I'm going to be progressing. So what's coming up next? Well, on my channel, I'm going to continue to do reviews of sport nutrition products. I'm thinking about doing ready to drink protein drinks, but if there are any sport nutrition products that you specifically want me to get into, then please comment on them in the notes of this video. Also, I'm planning my next adventure, and at this point in time, I'm not entirely sure what that's going to be, but I am very keen to document the whole process, look at the sport nutrition involved in moving towards and training towards a new challenge. So whether it's going to be a unknown ultra in the UK, or some sort of multi-day adventure, or even some sort of swim run, then if there's something that you're doing or you're thinking about doing and actually want to dive deeper into it from a nutritional or training standpoint, then please put a link to it in the comments so that I can have a look, and possibly it might be my next adventure too. It's been an absolute pleasure taking you through this whole journey. I think in a weird way, you've helped hold me accountable. I think some of the hard training runs I might have skimped on a little bit if I wasn't here trying to explain about how you can get benefit nutritionally from doing this journey as well. So if you've enjoyed this and maybe you haven't watched all the videos, feel free to go back. There's hopefully some educational content in there. Feel free to like and subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be putting out a lot more sport nutrition, educational information in an unbiased and unsponsored way, as always. So final question, James, because you didn't achieve the sub 3 hour marathon goal, are you going to set this as a new goal and work towards it? Don't know. What do you think?